All right, exercise 14O, we're going to be looking at circular functions in terms of applications. Let's look at example 33. If you have your CAS, grab them out. If not, you can look up on screen. So here we go. I'm going to pick out my calculator, and on this side, we're just going to keep the question there. All right. So it says, it is suggested that the height, ht meters, so it's in meters, and the y-axis is clearly h, because it's h of t, of the tide above the mean sea level on January 1st at Wunang is given approximately by the rule, and so you've got a sine function, where t is the number of hours after midnight. So essentially, it means that t starting at 0 is at 12 a.m. Okay, and it runs per hour. You've got a rule that apparently the tides will have the mean sea level. So if you think about it as a pictorial sense, this is the mean sea level, so that must be the base. The tide must then go up by a certain height. So going up to a certain height. And then after a certain height, it goes below the certain mean. Okay, so think of the mean sea level as your midline of your graph. Okay, and then you've got your maximum minimum. You've got a sine graph, and they tell you that it's the hours after midnight. The first part says, draw the graph of y equals h of t. So t is the time, and we know that it starts at 12 a.m. all the way to, obviously, 24 hours, which is probably why it's 0 to 24. When you're sketching this, you can do it by hand if you want, or if most applications are using CAS. So I'm going to sketch this on a CAS. Now, like I've always taught you, I always want you to define the function first before you do anything. Okay, because this helps you to solve, and it also helps you to sketch. So instead of typing it twice, you only type it once. So here we go. I would go define. So again, hopefully you learned the shortcuts. Menu, I press the number 1 and I press 1 again. So menu 1, 1. Gives me define. I type in f of x, or if you like, you can do h of x, if that helps you. So I do f of x equals 2, and I type in the rule. 4 times sine, triggers on that side there, sine of, what is that, pi on 6. Notice, don't put t, but put x. The reason why is because when you sketch on your graph settings, they don't do t. They only ever sketch with x-axis values, okay? So make sure it's in terms of x, not t. And keep in mind that there is a domain in this one. So if you press enter straight away, this is going to sketch an infinite graph with no domains or no restrictions. So we're going to make sure the domain is between 0 and 24. So then it sketches the cycle within 24 hours. Okay, so here we go. We go control equals given that it is between 0, 0, x is greater than or equal to 0, but less than or equal to 24. I press enter. So now I've got my graph, my equation. I only needed to type that once. But that also means if I want to solve for x-intercepts now or y-intercept, it is pretty easy. I can type in the calculator. So if I did solve for x-intercepts, it's when y equals 0. So we go menu, algebra, which is number 3. So menu 3, 1 for solve. I'm solving for f of x. And remember, if f of x is the y value, when you're solving for the x-intercept, it's when y equals 0. So I say f of x equals 0. That's like saying y equals 0, comma, x, telling it to say solve for x if y equals 0. Close brackets. So this would work because I've got my domain from 0 to 24. Now, what's one thing I want you to pay attention to? In your calculator, especially if you're doing further and methods at the same time, check if your radian is in over here. So it's a rad or it's a deg. Okay, because often with circular functions, I've marked quite a number of students in year 11 where they're doing the exam, not the SAC, because I normally can remind you, and when it comes to exams, you tend to forget. They don't check the mode. Okay, so if you're not checking your mode and it's in degrees, all your answers are wrong. Okay, so if this isn't currently in pies, then we're talking about radians. If they tell you it's degrees, they'll put a little degree symbol for you. Okay, so I've only ever done it for one SAC, for one year 12, who totally did the entire SAC in year 12 in degrees, and I can't change it. Whatever you've done wrong, it's wrong. So make sure it is in radians. So you only have that problem if you're doing further and methods, so you have to switch between the two. Further uses degrees, and in methods we use radians. Okay, and same thing with exact values versus approximate. Further uses approximate, we use exact. Okay, so those are the only things you got to be mindful of if you're doing both subjects there. All right, so for those who are still in degrees, again, you can move your cursor up here and you can click it and it becomes degrees or rad. Alternatively, you can go to Documents, Settings and Status, Document Settings, and down here, radians, you can change that to degrees or radians. Okay, so I'm going to press Escape. So now I'm going to press Enter, and that gives me 0, 6, 12, 18, 24. So these are my x-intercepts. Okay, so I can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 intercepts there. So if I were to just quickly picture what this graph could look like, we know that sine graph starts off at the center. It goes up. So 2 intercepts, 3, 4, 5. So I'm guessing my shape will look something like this. Okay, because it has 5 intercepts, where it is 0, 6, 12, 18, 24. Just even based on that, I can probably now figure out if those are the x-intercepts, then the middle, which is the peak, must be 3. 3 will have a maximum. 3 again, which adds to 9. 9 must be a minimum, maximum. But you can see I'm doing a bit of logic here. But say you didn't pick up on that, then you can now sketch it. So I'm going to go Control, Page, add a graph. Okay, add a graph number 2, and I can just type in f of x because you're ready to find it. So if I type f of x, it should sketch with the restricted domain. But remember, this is also second skill to adjust the windows. So in your exponential logarithms, I know some of you just left whatever you saw there. You have to learn how to adjust the windows, okay? In year 12 exams, they will purposely make sure you don't see the graph as soon as you press enter. Because by default, this is always between negative 10 to 10. Okay, and the graphs you're going to get is not going to be negative 10 to 10. It's going to be in the thousands or 100,000s. So learn to adjust your window. So I'm going to press enter, and we can see that is not my graph. Okay, it has to be from 0 to 24. That's only negative 10 to 10. So adjusting the window, I only taught you 3 buttons essentially. You can play around with what you want, but there's 3 buttons to work, and I only use 3 to adjust the windows. Yeah, menu, window. The only 3 I taught you so far was 1. Try out zoom fit. Sometimes if you do zoom fit, the calculator fits it perfectly for you in the first go. So I'll try zoom fit. Doesn't work. Okay, it fitted the maximum minimum, but still I haven't got the sides. So if you want to go backwards, I simply do Control Escape and it does undo. Okay, so I just go back and I'm like, all right, so zoom fit didn't work. The second one I showed you is zoom box. You only use zoom box once you've got the entire shape. Okay, when you see the shape, you can actually choose which sections you want, and it focuses on exactly that window. So that's the only time I'd use zoom box. If I zoom fit and I got all the graph, then I'd use zoom box to crop it so that it's easy. Then your third option is then you have to do it logically. Okay, so logically, I like to do it this way. This shows that you have general understanding of what's happening to the graph. So I know it's between 0 to 24. So it's not the height that was a problem, okay? It's not the negative 6 to 6, but it's the x-axis. I needed it from 0 to 24, so I could have done negative 5, for example, all the way to 30, and that should include it all. There you go. Now, if I didn't like that, I can now make it using zoom box. I only use 3 things here: Windows, zoom box, and with your cursor, you can actually then click on a corner that you think you want to include, move your cursor to the next corner that you want. So I might curate it to around here. I press click, and there you go. That looks much nicer. It's nice and big, it's clear, but I only use 3 things. 1, Windows settings. 2, Windows box, and then A, which is Windows fit. Those are the only 3 I ever use. You can use zoom in, zoom out. I don't like zoom in, zoom out because as you zoom out, sometimes you get your height, but you definitely don't get your width, and your graphs will look potentially really thin. It doesn't help you. Yeah, so I normally say you adjust it either by the Windows, zoom box, or zoom fit. So get really good with those 3 skills, or find some skills when you sketch a really large graph like an exponential. I do want you to be able to fit it so it looks like that. Okay, it has to be clear for you to see. All right, but there you go. Now answering the question, what do we want? It says draw the graph. Okay, I'm just going to copy paste this. I'm gonna copy paste. Here we go. I've drawn the graph. Fantastic. I've got my graph over here. Let's just replace that one that I drew. All right, we got our graph. You can find the x-intercepts from the graph as well if you wanted to. You can press menu 6, 0 if you didn't know, so analyze 0. And you can just click to the left of where you think the x-intercept is and to the right of where you think it is. It will give you 6, 0. So remember I said 0, 6, 12, 18, 24. You can do that for all of them. If you want to find the maximum and minimum, so I said before should be in the center, so 3 and whatever the maximum height is, which looking at the equation must be 4 because that's the amplitude. But if you didn't know that, again, 4, 6, maximum. Okay, so analyze graph, go to maximum, and again, left of where you think the maximum is, right of where you think the maximum is, and there you go. 3, 4. Okay, so answering the questions now, once you've got the graph, they want you to say, when was high tide? So the key word here is to be careful. They said when. Okay, so remember T is the number of hours after midnight. So we can see high tide must be 3, which is the first height above the mean sea level. Then the high tide would be at 3 a.m., the first one at least. And then the next one must then be over here. So you can work out the times. That's 3, 6, 9 is the minimum. And then you got 12, then 12 plus 3, that must be 15. But if you didn't know, again, same thing. Menu, 6, 3, maximum, and I've got 15. So what's 15 in terms of hours? 15 hours after midnight, what time is that? Yeah, 3 p.m. Okay, so you got 3 a.m., 3 p.m. That should be your answer. Okay, but don't write 3:15 because what does that mean? They're asking when. When was high tide? This is hours. You can say 3 hours after midnight or 15 hours midnight. That still makes more sense. That's a when. But you can't just write, it's all right, 3 and 15. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so we've got 3 hours or 3 a.m. I'm just going to write 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. over here. What was the height of the high tide? Well, clearly we know it's 4, but you don't just write 4. What do you write? 4 meters. Very good. Make sure to include the units. What was the height of the tide at 8 a.m.? So again, you know this is 8 hours after midnight. So going back to your general calculator, because you defined it, it's when x, which is the time, is 8 hours after midnight. You just do f of 8. Enter. That's my height. If you want it in meters, it's negative 3.46, which means 3.46 meters below the sea level mean. Okay, so you can see I would say here, what was the height of the tide? I would say it's 3.46 meters below mean sea level. Now, most students will get pretty good at answering A, B, C, D. E is the one that I often get students in a SAC or an exam. So let's have a look at E. It says, a boat can only cross the harbor bar when the tide is at least. That's a key word, at least. Minimum, so I'm going to write here, at least 1 meter above sea level. So the question is, when could the boat cross the harbor? On January 1st. So most students will find this one tricky. I want to know what you're thinking when you're reading that question. This is often a question that students have no idea. They leave it blank while they write random questions or answers. What is it asking?
Just anything above 1, as in you need to find the domain of that area and then convert it into the hours.
Which then gives you the time. Because the question was asking, when could the boat cross the harbor? Right? So you need to tell me what time when it can cross. When can it cross? It has to have a minimum height of 1. According to this graph, this gives you a maximum height of 4. Okay, we need a minimum height of 1. So as soon as it hits 1, there's a certain time when it reaches 1, and then it comes back to 1 again, and then it can't go. But that means there's an interval somewhere from this time to this time that it's okay. So how do you do this? Very easy. If you've got a graph, that's all you have to do. I'm going to go back to my graph. Here we go. Press tab, so you enter another graph. So I'm going to press tab, and we know it's 1, right? It's when it's equal to 1. So I type y equals 1. This is the bar. Okay, that's when these 2 points here, that will tell me that's when it equals to 1. That's when it's okay. So you can use your graph settings right now. You can find the intersection. So menu, graph, analyze intersection number 4, and you're finding the intersection between these two graphs right here. That gives me 0.48 hours after midnight. I can get the next one, menu 6.4, and you can get this one, 5.5174. Yeah. Even better. See, now we're thinking. See, once you know what you're doing, it's not a hard question. You're right. I'd rather do exactly what Jacob just said than do what I'm showing you here. But the nice thing about this part is it's easy for you to visualize what I'm talking about. Yeah? So we just want to know these 4 points. There are 4 points that the boat can definitely go through the harbor, and we just need to know those times. So let's work it out. So you can do what I'm doing here and just find each intersection, or like Jacob said, wasn't it just easier to do solve menu 3.1? Sorry, let me just do it. Menu 3.1, menu 3.1, and I'm solving for f of x. When does it equal to 1? Comma x. See, once you define it, I've only got 3 or 4 lines here. It's not that hard. Yeah, once you define it, you don't have to retype. So I press enter, and here we go. I've got my decimals. So that's my 0.48, that's my 12.48, and that's my 17.5, and that was the 5.517. But I'm not done yet. See, some students will still leave their answers like that, and that's done. Why am I wrong?
You need to convert to hours.
Very good. I need to convert this so that I've got a time that I can use. Okay, so I've got 0.48. 0.48, let's say 0.4825837339. This is in terms of hours already, but I don't know what the time is. This is 0.4825837339 hours after midnight. How do you find out the time then?
Ooh.
What do you do?
Well, if it's that hours, then you just multiply that by 60.
Why?
Because there are 60 minutes in an hour. And so you'll find the minutes instead.
Perfect. Whoops. Mine's an exact value. Control Enter gives you it. So this gives me 28.9 minutes after midnight. So if you had to answer this question, this essentially means at 12:29, the boat can enter into this harbor. Up until when? And then you got the next time, 5.5174, 5.517416 times 60. Oh,
you did it again. So
I did it again. 331 minutes. Or another way of thinking about it, it's 5 hours and you only need to convert the 0.517416. So if I convert it, 0.517416 times the 60, that's the only part I needed minutes because I knew the other one was 5 hours already. So, I keep doing the same thing. 31 minutes. So that means it's 5 hours after midnight with an extra 31 minutes. So it's 5:31 a.m. 5:31.
If you just divide it by 100, you get the thing. You just get it. Everything after the decimal is minutes enough for everything.
So say that again.
If you times it by 60 and divide by 100, you get the decimal at the front is the hours and the stuff behind is minutes.
Correct. Exactly. So that's what makes this question. So there are 3 parts here. So you see, 1 is to understand what the question was asking, and 2, you can see that there's a lot of ways to find the intercepts to know what you want. Once you got the points you want, the last part is to make sure you're answering the question appropriately. So these are very typical Year 12 questions, but it's just this one's made a bit easier, but it's the same idea. They will always ask you what we think of an inequality question. Okay, you're essentially asking to analyze that graph. So this is a very typical question, part E. A, B, C, D, every one of you will get really good at it. It's E. Think about how to apply. So you need to understand what the diagram looks like, what does it represent, then you can analyze it. Okay, so that's what exercise 14O is going to be about. You're going to be doing more of those kind of questions, and I want you to practice using your CAS. I often spend more time on non-CAS to make sure your theory is good. Once your theory is good, I'm okay with you using CAS. Okay, so use your CAS, double check your answers, and in fact, you guys are generally pretty good at CAS. In my previous school, CAS was what I needed to train, and they were really good at Section 1, which is ironic over here. It's like Section 1 is what I'm building with you. Over there, I was building their CAS work because I don't do enough of it with them. Okay, so your CAS work is good, but we need to build up on the algebra. So exercise, if you're behind, exercise 14E, 14H are important for algebra, and then sketching, That was the big part. 14G, 14I, 14J. If you can do 14J, you are on top of it all. You are ready for next year. Okay?